Hello, once again to Viper Bites, Week 16, Monday Night Football preview, and we have another dandy for you that has some serious playoff implications on the line. We have the 7-7 Dolphins who are right there in the mix for that AFC wild card. We've got the 7-7 New Orleans Saints who happen to be right there in the mix for that NFC wildcard. Who's the better 7-win team? We will find out this week. We will find out Monday night. But here's a little thing. The Dolphins, they are 2-4 this season on the road. Okay, advantage New Orleans. Wait, New Orleans, they're only 2-4 at home. There is no home field advantage when we're looking at this one. And we got some more tidbits like that coming up here as we break down the tail of the tape for the Miami Dolphins and the New Orleans Saints. Now, I am recording this video here on the Saturday. Things are going to change. Hey, if you're on the East Coast, technically I'm recording this on Sunday morning. That's what time it is here right now. But let's dive right in. If things change, I will drop a breaking news video because we know things are changing every day, every minute when it comes to the NFL and COVID and how it's being handled and how you are handling your rosters here for fantasy football. Now, let's talk about the Miami Dolphins and let's talk about Tua Tagovailoa. Tagovailoa so far this season has 2,141 yards on 211 completions. He has 14 touchdowns to only 8 interceptions, and his 94.3 QB rating, that's respectable. But the key here for the Miami Dolphins is a stat is wins. Now, Miami, they started the season off 1-7. Things were not looking good in South Beach, but they have turned it around. 6 straight wins. Thanks in a large part to this Dolphins offense converting 66.7% of their trips into the red zone into touchdowns. That's right. 2/3 of the time that they get into that 20-yard mark or inside that, they are scoring a touchdown. And we in fantasy football, we love them fantasy tutties. I'll tell you what. Now, Tua personally will be looking to rebound this week after a subpar performance last week against the Jets in which he saw, well, he threw 2 interceptions. And you know what? The problem here is the Saints, they've been pretty good at pressuring the quarterback and holding fantasy production to a minimum. Look at Tom Brady last week. He was throwing tablets around. That's how good the Saints defense was at getting to them. Now, of course, over the course of the season, they've given up 17.04 fantasy points per game. But in the last 4 weeks, they've been better. They've only given up the 6th most fantasy points per game. That's the Saints defense, allowing only 13.52 fantasy points per game. But there's a little bit of an asterisk there. We'll get to that here in a second. Now, Myles Gaskins and Duke Johnson will look to provide some kind of a 1-2 punch at the running back position this week for the Dolphins as they face the top-ranked fantasy defense when it comes to limiting running back production. Now, New Orleans, they are allowing a league-low 18.86 fantasy points per game on the season and have allowed the second fewest touchdowns to opposing backs thus far. But that defense, they typically have DeMario Davis, who is a heat-seeking missile there on the defensive side of the ball. They won't have him this week. They typically have Malcolm Jenkins, who, like DeMario Davis, will be absent from this one due to COVID protocols. So this Saints defense changes up a little bit here on what they are able to do. Now, Myles Gaskins, he typically follows up an off week with a stronger week. Last week was that week to come strong, but Duke Johnson kind of stepped in there and he kind of took the bull by the horn, so to speak, there and left Myles Gaskin holding the bag. Now, you look at what Gaskin's done, 6 games of 10 or more fantasy points this season, but his 10 carries for 54 yards last week, that played second fiddle to what Duke Johnson did. Duke Johnson, RB1 for week 15. What part of that even sounds remotely right? RB1, not on this team, but in the entire National Football League. Johnson went from the couch to the penthouse, 25.7 fantasy points, 23 touches, 127 yards, 2 touchdowns. Now, I don't see him duplicating that performance, but with no Malcolm Jenkins and no DeMario Davis, there's an opportunity for the Dolphins to pad those stats at the running back position. Now, maybe the biggest loss from last week to this week is Jalen Waddle. He is back, and that is not a good thing for this Saints secondary. We've already talked about that leader, Malcolm Jenkins. He is not available for this one. He kind of holds that glue together for that entire secondary. You know, Waddle, he is 8th in the NFL in receptions. 8th amongst all pass catchers, not just rookies. On 114 targets, Waddle has turned that into 849 yards and 4 touchdowns. Or in fantasy, like we like to call it, 199.2 fantasy points, which sits him 18th amongst all wide receivers. And he's done this in 13 games. Now, CJ Gardner Johnson, you were all smiles right in Tom Brady's face last week. I don't think you're going to be smiling so much this week. Your assignment, should you choose to accept it, is guarding Jalen Waddle in the slot. Now, Gardner Johnson, he has struggled at coverage in the slot this season, allowing a 69% catch rate. You should expect that catch rate to increase this week as Jalen Waddle looks to expose that coverage just a little bit. Now, Devonte Parker, he is coming off a 16.8 fantasy performance in last week's victory over the aforementioned New York Football Jets, in which he accounted for 68 yards on 4 receptions, including 1 touchdown. Now, this was done in Jalen Waddle's absence, but if Tagovailoa can get both Waddle and Parker on the same page in the same game, and Parker, who has seen at least 5 targets in every game that he's played in, this offense could get some points going in a hurry against a depleted Saints defense. That may be easier said than done. As of right now, it appears Parker is probably going to draw some coverage from Marshawn Lattimore, which kind of gives Lattimore a bit of an edge, in my opinion. Now, who could have a big game here when it's all said and done? Mike Gaseki. Yes, I know his production has dropped somewhat in recent weeks. At one point, he was the tight end 4, maybe even flirting with tight end 3 status, and now he's kind of dropped to tight end 8 with 148.7 fantasy points in 14 games. Still, if you would have told me in the beginning of the season that Mike Gaseki would average 10.5 fantasy points per game, I would have gladly taken that. Look, some of that drop-off is in part of the touchdown regression. He has now gone 7 straight games without a touchdown grab. But I mentioned Malcolm Jenkins. I'm going to keep circling back to Malcolm Jenkins. He's the guy typically responsible for covering the tight ends. He is not going to be there this week. So you know what? Maybe this is the week that Mike Gaseki finds pay dirt again against the Saints. Now, speaking of the Saints, we've talked about DeMario Davis and Malcolm Jenkins. There is a plethora of other players who are not going to be available, including Taysom Hill and Trevor Siemien, who are both on IR list right now as far as COVID is concerned, meaning the Ian Book era is about to get underway. Good news, Saints fans. Book is undefeated in college, playing at home, but it's going to take a lot for the Saints to pull this one off, but not entirely impossible against a top-ranked defense, against a quarterback position over the last 4 weeks. Yeah, maybe it's going to be a lot harder than I think. Now, Miami, they're allowing only 8.38 fantasy points per game while picking off 4 passes and not surrendering a single touchdown over that 4-week period. Now, the Saints knew they were going to be in tough. They pulled up their phone. They called everyone they could think of. Philip Rivers. No, sorry, Philip. Philip said, you know what? I'd rather take Christmas. I just finished wrapping gifts for 15 kids. I want to sit back and watch them unwrap them. Drew Brees is like, no, thank you, man. I'll answer the call, but it's good to hear from you, but I'm quite comfortable where I'm at. Now, if anyone is happy that Ian Book is under center, it very well may be Alvin Kamara after last week's dud. I talked about the previous week about Amari Cooper's dud. Well, Alvin Kamara's dud was just as bad, especially for fantasy managers. But you know what? This is Christmas. This is the Christmas weekend, and we know what Alvin Kamara does on Christmas weekend. He could win you a fantasy matchup all by himself. Now, Kamara, he did drop down to RB14 on the season after posting 13 touches for 31 yards last week. Now, Kamara, for the most part, has been productive. 1,016 yards from scrimmage, 8 touchdowns in 10 games. And in week 14, he put it in on the Jets there for 145 yards and a score. Miami has allowed only 10 touchdowns to date, 8 rushing, 2 receiving, 2 running backs over the last 4 weeks. They ranked third in fantasy points allowed to the position, allowing just 13.5 on 309 rushing yards and not allowing a score on the ground in those 4 contests. So if you can't get it done by ground, can you get it done by air? Marquez Callaway was a top target for Taysom Hill last week, posting 112 yards on 6 receptions. When all was said and done, he had a 33% of the target share. Again, this was with Taysom Hill under center and not Ian Book. When you look at the Saints depth chart and everything going down, maybe this turns into a Kenny Stills type week. Now listen. Usually when you have a third string quarterback, you're going to find a third string wide receiver who has been working with them in practice, on the practice squad, whatever that may be. And that's the player there's that comfort between the two of them. And that could be Kenny Stills this week. I'm not starting him. I'm not saying start him. I'm just saying watch for this. This could happen. Now, regardless, Callaway, he is a deep flex for me, probably more along the lines of a wide receiver 4. And if you think I'm down on Marquez Callaway, how do you think I feel about Tre'Quan Smith? Smith hasn't produced more than 10 fantasy points since week 11 against Philadelphia. The last 2 weeks, he has only seen 3 targets in this offense, and after seeing 5 in the previous 4-game stretch, that's a bit of a drop-off. That's a flag for me. Now, things aren't going to be easy for Callaway, Smith, or any other Saints wide receiver, having not only Ian Book calling the plays, but Miami has defended fantasy receivers tough all season long. 19.37 fantasy points per game is the 4th best over the last 4 weeks. Now let's flip our attention. Maybe there's some help at the tight end position. Nick Vannette faces a Dolphins team ranked 16th in fantasy points per game to the tight end position on the season, allowing 12.72 per. But over the last 4 weeks, that number gets reduced again to 9.86 fantasy points. Vannette last week, 1 target, 0 receptions. The previous 3 weeks, he recorded 8.1 fantasy points, 7.8 fantasy points, 7.4 fantasy points, respectively. And as of Saturday afternoon, more bad COVID news. Adam Troutman, Juwan Jennings, they're both still on the COVID IR list. So as you can see, the Saints are facing an uphill battle when it comes to this matchup. Maybe they get lucky. Maybe they get a few players back in time for this one. But everything right now is pointing in favor of the Dolphins and this Dolphins offense. One team trending here in the right direction, getting hot, especially on offense at the right time, facing a good defense without their good players there. Now, you've still got Cameron Jordan, who can actually absolutely wreak havoc on any offensive line. So there's always that going to play into account. But, man, if the Saints can pull this one off, they have pulled the wool over my eyes because I'm taking the Dolphins in this one. And I really believe Jalen Waddle is going to have a big week. I think he's going to be wide receiver 1, probably in that, let's call it wide receiver 11. That's for a good measure here. And as far as Devonte Parker, I think you can start him at flex. Mike Gaseki, he's going to be a top 5 tight end, in my opinion, this week without Malcolm Jenkins there in coverage. And Alvin Kamara, he may be the only Saint we're starting in this one, just pretty much like every other week. With that all said, make sure to give it a good old-fashioned thumbs up here on the video. Hit that subscribe button. If you're listening to us on Apple, Spotify, Anchor, whatever that may be, take a second, rate and review the show. And as always, hit me up on Twitter at Matt Donnelly, FF, with your starts and sits questions, your waiver wire questions, trade questions. We're heading into the Dynasty offseason, which is not really an offseason. It's just the season getting going. With that all said, again, head over to fantasypoints.com. Get that subscription. Get that inside edge on your competition today. And by the way, if you get it today, you may get a little bit of a discount there. So head over to that website and check out what they all got. We will see you next week. Take care and good luck. Hopefully we'll see you all in your fantasy championships.